The 19th century belonged to Britain. It wasn't merely an empire. It was a global operating system, written in the language of the pound sterling and dictated by the will of Her Majesty the Queen. Its navy was the law on all oceans. Its banks were the beating heart of the world's economy. The empire on which the sun never set seemed eternal, carved from granite and steel. The facade was flawless. But every hegemony has its secret vulnerability, a cancer eating it from within. For the almighty British Empire, this vulnerability wasn't an enemy armada or a rebellious colony. It was a simple cup of tea. The entire nation, from the Queen in her palace to the last docker on the Thames, was obsessed with the beverage. Tea was the fuel of the Industrial Revolution, the sedative for a nervous aristocracy, and the working class's only joy. It was more than a habit. It was part of the British soul. But this soul had a price, and it was paid in silver. All the tea in the world grew in one place. China. The celestial empire of the Qing dynasty, an ancient, proud, and utterly self-sufficient civilization. The Chinese had no need for the coarse woolen cloths and mechanical trinkets of the red-haired barbarians. The imperial court was content with its own silk, its porcelain, and its sense of infinite superiority over the rest of the world. Trade was permitted in only one port, Canton, and only for hard currency. For silver. Year after year, millions of pounds sterling in silver bullion flowed east. It was a silent, relentless economic hemorrhage. The foundations of Britain's financial system were crumbling, while the gilded coat of arms on the facade still gleamed. In the halls of the East India Company, a quiet panic simmered beneath a mask of gentlemanly calm. The trade deficit was becoming an abyss, ready to swallow their profits whole. They needed to sell something to China. Something it could not refuse. The solution came not from the workshops of Manchester, but from the poppy fields of Bengal, in conquered India. Opium. A drug. A product that creates its own demand. The perfect weapon for economic warfare. In 1800, it was a mere trickle. By the 1830s, it was a dark, viscous flood designed to turn the river of silver back. The first shipment of contraband opium, loaded onto fast clippers under the cover of night, was not just a commercial transaction. It was the first shot in a war that had not yet been declared. The cure for Britain's economy became the poison for Chinese society. The opium smuggling operation, organized by the East India Company with cynical efficiency, worked flawlessly. Millions became addicted. Entire provinces sank into a listless stupor. The government officials tasked with fighting the contraband became its most devoted customers. The social fabric of a 1,000-year-old empire began to unravel. And most importantly, the silver reversed its course. It now bled out of China and into the coffers of British merchants. The trade deficit was closed. But the price of this balance was written in broken lives. The scent of blood reached the Forbidden City. The Daoguang Emperor, watching his nation and his treasury dissolve in opium smoke, decided on an ultimatum. He sent his best man to Canton, the incorruptible and ruthless commissioner, Lin Zexu. His mission was simple: to eradicate the evil. To destroy the trade. The British merchants in Canton merely scoffed. They were subjects of the greatest empire on earth. They were untouchable. This pride, this certainty of their own hegemony, was their fatal mistake. They mistook resolve for a bluff. Lin Zexu was not bluffing. He demanded the surrender of all opium. When the British refused, he laid siege to their factories. He cut off their food and water. He brought them to their knees. In the end, more than 20,000 chests of opium, the annual profit of an army of traders, were confiscated and publicly destroyed at sea, mixed with lime and salt. This was not just a financial blow. It was a direct insult. A humiliation. Her Majesty's subjects had been forced to submit to the will of a pagan official. In London, this was not seen as an act of drug enforcement. It was seen as an act of war. The crack in the empire's facade had become a chasm. And from that chasm, one could already hear the roar of cannons. Retribution was swift. But it was wrapped in the noble robes of principle. In Parliament, no one spoke of defending the right to deal drugs. Oh, no. They spoke of free trade, the protection of British property, and the honor of the flag. It was a triumph of realpolitik. A dirty commercial war was repackaged as a crusade for civilized values. The empire struck back. Not to teach a lesson, but to break a will. It was not a battle of equals. It was a demonstration. The steam engine versus the sail. The rifle versus the smoothbore cannon. Iron hulls against wooden junks. The British Expeditionary Force methodically, coldly, and with overwhelming technological superiority, shattered the defenses of China's coastal cities. They did not seek to conquer China. The goal was far more terrifying: to humiliate it. To make it bleed and beg for mercy. The climax was the push up the Yangtze River, toward the heart of the empire. When the British warships dropped anchor near the walls of the ancient capital, Nanking, and aimed their guns at the city, the Qing dynasty faced its choice. The point of no return had been crossed. Fight to the last man and watch your civilization burn, or accept humiliation in the name of survival. They chose survival. It was a deal with the devil, and it was called the Treaty of Nanking. This was not a peace treaty. It was an invoice, presented by the victor to the vanquished. China was forced to pay a massive indemnity, not only for the destroyed opium, but for the entire cost of Britain's military expedition. They were forced to pay for their own subjugation. 5 ports were forcibly opened to foreign trade. The island of Hong Kong was ceded to the British Crown in perpetuity. And most critically, China lost the right to set its own tariffs. Its economic sovereignty was annihilated. The moment the ink dried on that parchment, China's long history as the self-sufficient center of the world was over. It had been saved from total destruction, but the price of that salvation was submission. It was the beginning of what China itself would come to call the Century of Humiliation. The world was changed forever. The Treaty of Nanking was not an end, but a beginning. It opened the floodgates. Following Britain, other Western powers rushed into a weakened China, each eager to carve its own piece of flesh from the body of the dying dragon. A second Opium War, more unequal treaties, lost territories, humiliation became a permanent state of being. The gilded facade of the Celestial Empire had collapsed, revealing the rotten supports beneath. The Qing dynasty became a puppet, unable to protect its own people. And Britain? It had achieved triumph. The balance of trade was not merely restored, it was shattered in its favor. The opium trade, now virtually legal, generated colossal revenues. The silver they had once chased now flowed in a torrent into Her Majesty's treasury, financing the Victorian era, its factories, its railways, its indomitable army. The empire had not just survived, it was stronger than ever. Its power, its prosperity, its very culture, was now fertilized by narcotic profits and paid for by the dissolution of a civilization on the other side of the world. The cruel benefactor had saved itself by sacrificing another. And so, behind the curtain of civilization and free trade, the true history of the 19th century was written. A story where the refined habit of one nation became the fatal addiction of another. It wasn't a tragedy. It was just business.